Again, another similar video. Like the video critique about Buddhism, but this is more of a general topic. Why reincarnation is impossible. Even if there is an afterlife, even if we take for granted some evidence of the afterlife, like scholarship, right? Like the spring briefing psychology of the science of life after death, the Bigelow Center at the Institute of Consciousness Studies, and their first ever essay contest. All these prove more of a permanent afterlife state than a reincarnation approach, right? But even then, this is gonna based on the criticism written by Michael Suto, who himself is a Zen Buddhist. So he's a Buddhist, so he does believe in a reincarnation, although there are certain schools of thought within Zen that believe in a more permanent afterlife state, but that depends who you ask. And even though he's a Zen Buddhist, he's analyzing this as a philosopher, trying to critique like there is no afterlife, even though he himself is a Buddhist. By the book review of Science of Reincarnation, Exploring Belief, Cases, and Theory by James Matlock. There are many scholars who are trying to make a case for reincarnation. The second most popular one besides Matlock is like Jack Tucker, and he admitted that a majority of his cases are probably not true and there's a better explanation, so there's that. And their best evidence are interviews with children between ages 2 to 5. So yeah. But okay, let's go. In his book, Science of Reincarnation, he got important rituals related to the belief of reincarnation. These include historical and social prominence in the belief in various cultures around the world, especially in places with spiritual and religious communities. Manlock also explored data seemingly suggest that reincarnation attempt to develop theory of reincarnation that accounts for the data collected by parapsychological investigation and researchers. In this way, he showed that a belief in reincarnation is defensible in the conclusion from what he calls science of reincarnation. He does a good job mapping a wide range of beliefs about reincarnation by time and culture. His description of various case studies and their salient features are highly informative. His effort to develop a theory of reincarnation is laughable at times by trying to accumulate the various details of interesting case studies and a core idea of reincarnation in the spiritual tradition of the world. Unfortunately, this is where my praise ends. Like many other books on the subject, it suffers from a variety of serious defects. The cavalcade of poor scholarship, conceptual confusion, and impoverished argumentation is particularly egregious given the science is allegedly passed on lecture notes for the advanced undergraduates or master level graduate seminars. First, the marginalization argument. The problem is tendency to marginalize argumentation. He marginalized this enterprise in few ways. His lack adequate clarity about the structure of his own argument, and when discussing position opposite so he doesn't provide the argument given on behalf of the opposition. He failed to do this even when discussing viewpoint which he is in agreement. Thus, and he privileged assertion of selected quality of sources over the heavy lifting of arguments, analysis, and critique. Consequently, his case for and in defense of reincarnation is illusion. The problem of clarity and Matlock's argumentation. Throughout the preface tells us that he intends to do not what he intends to argue, but reader reads to note the proposition he intends to show are true, plausible, or probable, and man needs to clarify lay out the structure of his intended reasoning. The action process and how he intends to explore the topic is secondary at best. A thin programmed topical outline is suitable for substitute for analytical outline, shows the overall structure of his intended argument. Being clear about the structure is one intended argument should answer 2. Important question for the reader. 1. What is the main argument? 2. What arguments are invoked to support the premise of the main argument? His answer should by clearly state, at least in general way, in either the preface or the introductory chapter, and he should clearly track the answer in an organized way throughout the book and successfully summarize his arguments in the book's conclusion. None of this happened. There are, of course, various attempts at argument throughout the book, so Magla is clearly interested in making argument, it's just poorly executed. One example is the failure to connect what appears to be a distinct conclusion at different points in the book. Portions of the text attempt to refute materialism or objectives to reincarnation, even though materialism in itself doesn't necessarily reject reincarnation. For example, if you believe in the multiverse theory and every interpretation, that would be one way of approaching it. The conclusion here seems to be that materialism is false or at least highly implausible. Other parts of the text allegedly refute alternative explanation for the data, but show they are less plausible than reincarnation. The conclusion here seems to be that reincarnation is the best interpretation of the data. He suggests to attempt to construct theory reincarnation that fits the data. The conclusions are seen to be the theory is a theory reincarnation, the processual soul theory that predicts the data and exhibit over explanatory virtue necessary for a good theory. But I will address his apparent argument for each of these three conclusions. I want to point out that Mark isn't clear about how these conclusions are supported to be related, most importantly how they're supposed to be related to whatever or how good the evidence is in support of the truth of reincarnation. This is especially odd since he repeatedly said he's attempted in an attempt to explore whether these evidence for reincarnation and how strong the evidence is. We get no clear answer to this question and how it's related to what it takes himself to show about the implausibility of materialism and explanatory deficiency of non-reincarnation theories, or even alleged explanatory virtues of his proposed theory of reincarnation. Just to be clear, I'm not criticizing for not giving a formal presentation of his argument. My criticism suffers from immediate deficiency with respect to presentation. Argumentation should not be a scavenge hunt or an analyst to work a jigsaw puzzle. The reader should have searched for the hidden clues to uncover the premise and conclusion of the argument, and to search for other clues to distinguish from supporting argument. This is especially true for a book that's touted as a college-level text suitable by professionals. The prevailing claims is over arguments. Far from being a minor representation problem, this dialectical defect is baked into Matlock's entire approach. Not only does Matlock fail to clearly state his own argument, he neglects the presence of the arguments of others. He repeatedly tells his reader what people claim, but he doesn't cite, much less critically engage the reason for they offer in support of their claim. Sadly, this is surprising. If someone doesn't see the value in clearly present the reason for his own viewpoint, he's unlikely to see the merits of doing this when it comes to perspective of others. Matlock's discussion of materialism illustrates this. He refers to scientists and philosophers who allegedly show problems with materialism, but he does not give their argument. He attributes claims that they does not show their alleged support for their claims or how strongly the evidence supports their claim, much less how the opinion of scientists provide for much clamorous claims that consciousness is independent of physical substrates. Matlock enlisted the view of Henry Strand, which is problematic because Henry Strand believes in a permanent afterlife based on the substance dualism, but he also believes that it's also compatible with physicalism. Ostensibly to support his own mind-brain dependentism, but there is no little detail. There is no obvious connection between their views in shared vocabulary and synthetically similar sentences, but this makes Matlock's discussion no more credible than Deepak Chopra. He said physicists trap expose an interactionist that permits the mind to act indirectly to quantum processes in the brain and to play a key role in quantum biology. What is this key role? What is the argument for it? How does it support the claim that consciousness can exist without a brain or any physical substrate? Matlock does not say, the reader does not know. He also said a strong argument can be made for mind-brain interaction and the postmodern survival consciousness independent of the reincarnation case data. But what is this argument? It doesn't give any. Why is it strong? He does not say. The reader has no idea. Several pages later, he told philosopher Alava Noe thinks consciousness spirit does not arise from neural activity, followed by references to other scientists and philosophers who questioned the mind-brain identity thesis. Again, he does not think these arguments nor do they water content, much like how they would let support to Matlock's more specific claim that consciousness doesn't depend on the functioning brain or suitable physical substrate. The reader needs to understand that the relevant details remain ignored. And even then, we're no longer in the 1950s. The mind-brain identity theory, at least the more strict version of it, is no longer the dominant position among neuroscientists and cognitive psychologists. The majority are functionalist computationalists, and to those who are still mind-brain identity theory still subscribe to a functionalist computationalist version of identity theory. While this appears to authorities say they must judicially handle, the testimony of a handful of scientists is not a strong argument for what most scientists think, much less the truth of what they think. We need to see the scientists' argument for this claim under discussion together with a clear statement about the degree of coherence these thinkers give their claims. Just because a scientist proposes something does not mean he believes it, much less it firmly. If a Matlock only wishes to make an argument from authority, he needs to better celebrate his level of credence to fit the totality of opinions among all qualified scientists. Not based in opinions solely on convenient outliers. He fares no better when it comes to discussion positions that differ from his own. consider his functionally treatment of appeals to psychic functioning, a living person as a potential counter explanation for past life memories and all the stencil signs of reincarnation, or the morphic resonance with another alternative as well. At no point does Meta explain how thinkers who appear to Psi in this way construct is alleged to reincarnation explanation. He merely selects claims that these thinkers have made, remove the claims for their context and throw objectives at them. Matlock suggests they are not new, nor is his refusal to acknowledge, much less critical, address the obvious counter-arguments against his assertion provide the very authors that he discussed. Whether consciousness or not, his strategy amounts to little more than rhetorical trickery. You don't refute a person's argument by merely denying their conclusions. You don't refute a person's argument by quoting an authority who denies their conclusion. You don't refute a person's argument even by marshalling evidence against the conclusion. Refuting an argument requires showing the person's arguments fail. This is why I'll study the argument, demonstrate you to understand it, and engage in conscientious critique, for example, by providing reason to deny one of their key premises, showing that all the consideration we could to the force of their inference, showing how the evidence against their conclusion outweigh the evidence for it. He attempted any of this, he will realize that his criticism, for example, appeared to the lack of independent support for the kind of side allegedly needed to account for the phenomenon under the discussion, had anticipating the answer by the very thinkers he discussed. Stephen Brother and Michael Suter had argued that survivalists must postulate a kind of degree of psi in the sticker of what would need to be postulated. We intend to explain the same data solely on terms of living agents phi, although Brother has admitted that the survivalist has better evidence slightly overall than the living psi hypothesis, and I've got to put in the academic description why the survivalist has a better position than all the other psychic alternatives of it. But yeah. Meta doesn't present our argument, and yeah, he has no reason to accept the claims he attributes to us. Does this mean that he doesn't read what he has written? Maybe he is persuaded by his reasoning and see no good reason to accept our claim, but that doesn't absolve Matlock his intellectual responsibility of studying the reason we offer and critically engaging them. He should show why the argument we present are not a good argument. Without this, the reader is inadequately informed about what Brother and Suter think. What we think is much less whether Matlock has remotely plausible reason for rejecting. Consequently, the reader isn't the least bit informed about the debate. Matlock is alleging discussion. Next is about consciousness, about materialism and survival. Marginalization arguments tend to be combined with a wide range of consensual confusion, and this is exactly what we find. He said that skeptics frequently use materialism to prematurely and unfairly dismiss the evidence for reincarnation, even though we have scientists and philosophers and skeptics who are not naturalists and still reject the afterlife, like David Chalmers or Thomas Nagel. Unfairly dismiss the evidence, so he's tasked to challenge this position in philosophy of mind. His definition of material is philosophical position that the material reality is primary in the mind or consciousness secondary to it. Throughout the book, the term is a catch-all term that includes a metaphysical claim to foundation of reality, and various claims about the nature of human person consciousness, including mind brain identity theory, and the claim that the mind depends on the brain, presumably any other surrogate physical substrate, even though there are versions of naturalism that does not require that. For example, on the one extreme end of naturalism, you have like the logical positivist, reductive physicalist, like the investigation purple, like very straight to the point that it's not even realistic anymore. Or the other extreme end is religious/spiritual naturalism, where they believe in the afterlife, the divine, God, all that. But for them, it's all natural phenomenon. Despite all those things, a good example of this will be in antiquity the Stoics, the early Taoists, the Neo-Confucians, and to a lesser extent the Cynics, and even Epicureans who do believe in gods in atheistic, and certain Native American religion also implying to this here as well. So nothing new. I'm not sure Matlock even sees the difference between mind-brain dependence and mind-brain identity. He casually switched between them, conflate these two with critiquing so-called materialism, and the page listed to his intent under the mind-brain identity thesis refer to the page where he discussed mind-brain dependence. This confusion between an astonishing disconnect from the entire field of the philosophy of mind. Here's just one such implication. He entailed that some form of substantive dualism will count as materialist philosophies of mind. Why? Because some contemporary forms of substantive dualism afford the consciousness dependent on a functioning brain and do not entail the consciousness can exist without physical substrate. I have elsewhere discussed these versions of substantive dualism, but not Lowe. According to Talifero, substantive dualists do not deny that the destruction of the body leads to the destruction or annihilation of consciousness and person. They may hold there is no conscious person or life without certain configuration of physical states. But Matlock's sloppy discussion of materialism also lead him to make patently false claims about the prospect for life after death from a physicalist viewpoint. After refuting the materialist conception of consciousness as produced of cerebral activity, he said materialist position ruled out the possibility of the survival of consciousness after physical death. This claim is false. It's just noticed some substantive dualists affirmed that the brain produces consciousness or that consciousness otherwise dependent on a functioning brain. These substantive dualists are materialists given the broad definition of materialism that Matlock defined, but their position does not rule out the survival of consciousness as a social reference about he explicitly argued. The thing to appreciate here is that even if the brain produces consciousness or mental states are dependent on the brain, it does not follow, even probabilistically, that consciousness is essentially connected to the brain and cannot exist without it. This would be true, for example, if mental states are property of something immaterial substance, but it cannot have conscious episode without appropriate physical substrate. It will also be true if the mind or conscious is an information process structure. For the same information form and structure produced in or by one physical substrate can transfer to different physical media. The mind could be a substrate independent even if the brain is produced, in which case it does follow that the mind is destined for cessation upon biological death. Some physicalists accept substrate independence might be conferred on any number of physical substrates. Like Grosso is one example. It follows from the above the postmodern persistent consciousness does not require any commitment to disembodied mind or the possibility of consciousness existing without physical substrates. And that is true, not just from a point of view of non-Cartesian substantive dualists, but also the viewpoint of prominent physicalists. There are various physicalist theories of person roughly human or wholly physical or material beings that involve life after death in a form of divine assisted supernatural physical resurrection, or alternatively there is digitalism, a naturalistic view of immortality that rejects my body dualism, idealism, and my brain identity theory. Digitalists, for example, like Grosso, hold the mind is entirely computable, and such is substrate independent, so consciousness is capable of persisting beyond biological death, for example, through mind uploading and simulation. I suspect that Matlock will find some of these physical account life after death implausible, but that is not relevant. The point is not about the true philosophy of these three, but their logical implication. Even if false, these physical approaches show that Matlock's claim is both false and confused, nor is this accidental error in Matlock's network falsehood and half-truth. It is vital part of rhetorical classifying an entire book, for we have reader believe the scientists who reject reincarnation do so because they reject the possibility of survival on account of their materialist commitment. No doubt some do, but one can make the sensible observation without relying on obscurantism and falsehoods. While also bizarre that the given Matlock's definition of reincarnation, even reincarnation turns out to be compatible with some physicalist viewpoints above. According to Matlock's operational definition, while reincarnation is a duplex stream of consciousness that carries forward memory, behavior, disposition, and other aspect of personality through death to union with a no body. Later explains that clear reincarnation is not about replication of a complete identity in a new person, but the persistent conscious stream and the influence of previous personality on the present personality. All they require is substrate independence. So for all we know, this so-called evidence of reincarnation is only evidence for substrate independence, not evidence against the dependence of consciousness of the brain or other physical substrate. This is why digitalism permits reincarnation. Another is plain misinterpretation. For failing to present the argument for his critics, a more egregious error is his plain misinterpretation of their views. It is not surprising. He doesn't state the argument of his critics. There is no context to which there is interpretation of source material. Equally, there is no way for the reader to accept Matlock's critique without reading the author to misinterpret. But Butler does not such a thing to say to imply this is what happening. It's not argued that the truth of the motivational side hypothesis or even for its superior explanatory power, as probably explained, he is arguing that survivalists have prematurely dismissed appeal to psi in this context because their analysis had been psychologically superficial and consequently survivalists had decided to quickly in favor of survival. His point is not to motivate psi is a superior explanation to survival, but that survival not seeing how the motivate psi does challenge the survival has a present good enough reason to rule out this counterexample. Another sample, while clarifying the reincarnation, should be understood as involve the persistent unconscious stream, not the replication of the complete identity. Is this really true? No. Broader didn't say it's implausible for a discarnate personality of deceased person to survive for a time, then goes through a transition after reincarnation. He spoke of the seemingly implausible scenario one person become another person as a potential implication of Quinton's neo-Lockean view. His comment about the implication of someone else's view. In some cases, the distortion power in a single patches and produce a calvary of falsehoods and rhetorical charged misdirections. Prior to science, Matlock published a critical commentary of the method of the afterlife. His view was calculated distortion and misinterpretation, especially with respect to Keith Augustine and Michael Martin's book, The Dualist Dilemma. Despite Augustine having corrected Matlock on crucial interpreted points, he ignores any replies to Augustine. Augustine to offer Bayesian analysis in the site article, and Margaret is also corrected that the outcome of Bayesian analysis depends on the value assigned to the components of Bayes' theorem. But everything else Margaret said here is false. First, in the book Method of the Afterlife, are not discussing the mind-brain identity thesis or contrasting with mind-brain interaction. They're comparing the mind-brain dependence and mind-brain independence thesis. Their conclusion, using Bayesian confirmation theory and information theory, we find that the dependence thesis is vastly more probable than the independence thesis. Matlock's error is doubly incircular since Augustine corrected Matlock on it. Second, their Bayesian analysis explicitly states they are assigned the equivalent weight of 0.5 to the prior probability of each of the construction theses. This is the same prior probability permitted survivalists as assigned to survival in Bayesian style argument for survival. So Augustine Fisher do not assign much more weight to the brain identity thesis than to the possibility of mind-brain interaction. This is even true with respect to the mind-brain dependence thesis, which they are discussing. Consequently, it is false to say that Augustine had rigged their analysis to ensure that my brain dependence thesis, much less my brain identity thesis, will emerge as the winner. They assigned their value of 0.5 to the my brain dependence thesis, presenting up of the prejudice of the case against survival. They had, contrary to Matlock's unsupported assertion, given due consideration to the series question that will reduce the weight that may be fairness be allowed to it. They do not grant my brain dependency a presumption true, nor does it value their assigned to the prior probability on my brain dependence. Pretty support their Bayesian analysis to conclusion against survival. Two other things are worth noticing. There are other two things worth noting. First, he again shirks the responsibility of giving an argument. He claimed if all the evidence in favor of mind-brain interaction is taken into account as well, the argument of Bayesian analysis looks very different, but he does not give an argument showing this. Nor does he show what he values Augustine's provide and how such value will yield for the result he claims. Second, he obscured the crux of Augustine's argument, which that the net plausibility of posterior probability of independent thesis in its various incarnations is inferior to the mind-brain dependency thesis because of the former lacks a predictive power, not because of any particular assignment to prior probability. It's all hard to say whether Augustine's argument would have prevented such a erroneous error, but consider how important Matlock makes materialism to the reincarnation debate, yet he thinks he would have at least tried. His failure to do so is lazy and amateurish, and given that Augustine has corrected Matlock on these relevant to interpret errors, Matlock insisted on reproducing them as he does with others. It's a for cognitive transgressions that undermine the scholarly integrity, essentially advancing healthy debate on any topic. He also wishes to refute materialism, this is clear, but his reasoning at this juncture depends on a variety of false assumptions about what materialism is and how it's related to survival. He also fails to offer a single argument on behalf of materialism by those people branded with this rhetorical chargedom. Much less does he give a reader a glimpse into how skeptics have proposed that materialism or mind-brain dependence challenges arguments for reincarnation. Consequently, what Kant or the criticism of materialism is seriously, and to extent his case of reincarnation depends on refuting materialism, his case for reincarnation fails. Is it the best explanation for survivorship to claim that reincarnation provides the explanation that he makes these claims, and his reincarnation theory emphasizes a variety of explanatory virtues, and even considers planetary power. After arguing at least 5 different non-reincarnation interpretations of the evidence are inadequate. Even though, out of all interpretations of afterlife from scientific view, the majority are non-reincarnation in nature, providing, if true, more evidence in favor of a permanent afterlife state than a reincarnation state. The rhetoric is unfounded because that he either denigrate or agree while he might simply disagree. He therefore thinks that it can be reasonable to disagree with someone without degrading them. I see no reason why disagreeing with how researchers have reason to conclusion require denigrating them. But more importantly, does Matlock succeed at showing that reincarnation is the best planetary power? No, not even close. A good inference for the best explanation must adequately rule out competing hypotheses of freebie. This means showing the alternative, especially nearby ones, cannot explain the total data set as well as the preference freebie. To this requires having a clear set of explanatory criteria, assigning weight to terms and applying to consider the alternative freebie that was preferred theory. And he does none of this. Consider the punctual dismissal of the more recalcitrant counter arguments of the data, for example, the living agent psi explanation, especially on the robust psychological forms. As shown above, he relies on a variety of transparent falsehood and distortion of what this counter explanation is and how it alleged challenge reincarnation as explanatory candidate. He can't even bring himself to taste the argument those who had insisted that survival have been short-sighted and perceiving this counter. Consider also that Matlock's reason for dismissing counter-explanation often rests on the presumed lack of inadequate support for what those theories would need to commit themselves true. The case in point, the alleged lack of independent evidence for the kind of living simulation would require the account for the data, and yet his theory of reincarnation can be made to fit the data only given a wide range of assumptions which he's providing no independent evidence. For example, it's being unlikely that a conscious dream will lose its structure, like the memories, personality, trait, current functioning, including psi capability, when becoming discarnate, and the expectation will see other evidence post-mortem activities such as announcing dreams, operation, mediastic communications. He presents no independent evidence what the contact consciousness and mental function would look like if it persisted after that. If he can explain himself of all manner of assumptions that seem correct to him, but is feel to obligate to present evidence, there is no reason why such supporting author explanation can't do the same. But let's aside about the criticism granted that Mac has given us. For good reason to think that reincarnation simplifies this procedural theory is the best explanation of the data, what follows? It does not follow that reincarnation is a good explanation, much less a very good one. It might be a very poor one. It's a truism and inference of the best explanation. The best explanation for our data need not be a very good explanation. It might be a terrible one. And given that Matlock thinks the alternative explanations are as bad as they are, seems pretty clear that Matlock has at best show that in reincarnation the best explanation of a low explanation. This is underwhelming conclusion. I suspect that the Matlock explanatory virtue he attributes to his perceptual soul theory shows that his particular reincarnation theory is a good one, not much better than the alternative. After all, after listing some of his alleged explanatory virtue, he said his theory has considerable explanatory power. He does successfully show this? No. In fact, he seemed to utterly aware of the bridge that must be built on the best explanation to good explanation. A great problem is that the theoretical virtue he attributes to his theories are illusionary. Good theory, he tells us, can confirm or falsify. True, but at no point does Matlock say that observational data will falsify or disconfirm his hypothesis. He said that his theory is incompatible with certain possibilities, for example, transmigrating across species or retributive karma. But these possibilities are not observable data. To show that a theory is incompatible with certain theoretical statements is not show that a theory is incompatible with statements, and that report observable facts, as it is an empirical predicament of this theory rules out certain possibility. Of course, he does state some observable data, which he claims his theory produced, for example, The facts surrounding children who make vertical claims about previous personality who exhibit behavior or physical sign characteristic of previous personality, but I find the reason to be aback at best because, like I said, the theory of very large numbers and the theory of probability of coincidences. You know, it's not clear what prediction his theory makes with reference to the data he's discussing. Memories as such are not observable data through a claim that have remembered a past life is. But as Matlock explained, his reincarnation theory supposedly explain both the fact that some children claim to remember past lives and the fact that they doesn't make such claim or otherwise exhibit characteristic of the previous personality. So what is the observable data that the theory predict? What should we expect to observe if reincarnation is true? And more importantly, what would we not to expect to observe if reincarnation is true and why? When a hypothesis or theory has predicted consequence, it either entails or makes probable some observable datum. D. For example, D is an outcome with a parameter that excludes other data of affair that can at least in principle be observed. So we expect D, we do not expect not D, nor any other state of affairs incompatible with D. It's only because the predicted D is incompatible with the other possible predicted outcome that we say the hypothesis or theory can be disconfirmed. So what observable datum does reincarnation theory lead us to expect, and which, if not observed, would disconfirm his theory? Presumably, the prediction alleged confirmed reincarnation has something to do with person, especially children claiming past life memory and display behavior resembles and birthmark. But what exactly is the prediction here? In his own admission, his theory is compatible with the majority of the race not displaying these features. So why does the presence of these features in some cases confirm reincarnation, but their absence in other cases, apparently the vast majority of the race, not disconfirm reincarnation? I understand why he thinks his theory accumulates the fact that most people don't hear or don't claim to have past life memories in our present life. The subconscious is the repository of memories. Because he built in defense mechanisms against consciously remembering. Material in the unconscious can be presented or blocked, but I fail to see why these facts, when incorporated into Matlock's theory, would lead us to expect the world to look the way it does. Some children although having past memory and some not. Why not some other way? For example, one having past memories, having such memory, most people having such memory, most children have past life memory, but no adults having such memories, and no children having such memory, but most adults have such memories. Naturally, the absence of past life memories across the world does not count against his reincarnation theory, but that's only because the theory is, as far as I can see, compatible with very wide range of possible outcomes of this and other points of data. But this is hardly a theoretical virtue. Quite the opposite. The only reason I can see for his not making any of the alternate scenarios a prediction of his theory is that he already knows these scenarios do not obtain. So he merely accommodates the data rather than generally predicted. He doesn't seem to appreciate the explanation that merely accommodates previous known facts as a much weaker than explanation that are predicted novel facts. The former easily creates an illusion of genuine explanation by way of both of theorizing. Particularly illuminating regards as Matlock's explanation of how he built his reincarnation theory. And there's a lot of red flags with it. First, it is clear how the data could shape the details of his theory unless he adequately assumed that the data were subjective of reincarnation in some sense. But things beg to question why. Are we justifying thinking that data suggested reincarnation in the first place? If I assume the very similar unusual features of my garden are signs of an invisible gardener who said to my garden, it's only a lack of imagination that will prevent me from developing a theory about this gardener and how he, she, it work that could be easily accumulate anything I might observe. Similarly, if I assume that the various data Matlock discards are indeed signs of reincarnation, I can flesh out a theory of reincarnation that develops the core idea of what reincarnation is and how it works. Second, he incorporates a variety of luxury assumptions and independent evidence for which or any other current justification seem to wholly lacking. This gives the impression that the only reason for adopting the auxiliaries is to make the theory fit the facts. What's the motivation for accepting these assumptions unless one is already committed? Not a theory of reincarnation, but the contentious assumption that reincarnation is true, and some said the fact in question are connected to it. Anyone could create a just so story to accumulate facts, even otherwise reciprocate ones. One should not confuse it with theories in an empirical robust sense. His theory leads out to expect nothing with stated parameters. Yes, it can accumulate pretty much any datum. It will seem but only relies on large numbers of assumptions, limited only by one's imagination, but much of which are at least contentious as reincarnation itself. And we have no reason to suppose that Matlock's theory accumulate or otherwise improbable. i.e. predicted the theory but unexpected unaltered theories and not merely part of our background knowledge. For the reasons, his processual soul theory is not a good theory of reincarnation. I'm baffled by another problem. The final part of the entire book gives us a very indication that he's interested in whether there's good evidence for reincarnation. It's not clear what he means when trying to make make his case. It might mean that he intends to look at the quality of the data investigation methodology behind the collection of the data, but assessing how trustworthy data are isn't the same thing as asking whether the data are evidence for reincarnation. That's a question about the logical relation between a statement that express the data as statements that affirm reincarnation. Might have good reason to think that investigators have accurately described the fact and a murder scene. Whether these facts are good evidence that a particular person committed the murder requires a good inference from the facts. That said, I think it's clear from other true quotes about them, but I aim to also consider whether there is evidence that will support the likelihood of reincarnation, and he seems to think he's been successful in this regard. First, after detailed discussion on ostensible reincarnation cases, he says the reincarnation case do not stand alone for the suggestion that the mind has existed apart from the body, and he goes on to claim provide evidence of mind-body interaction, post-mortem survival, on the law of all evidence are now available of the mind's ability to function in a discarded state. Second, in the wrap-up of the final chapter, he introduced the best evidential question: is there evidence for reincarnation? As he informed the assess and affirm an answer depending on doing what he has done. In the book, it is at least suggested that he thinks there is evidence for reincarnation, very strong evidence, for he concluded, and I quote, "I now feel no hesitation to declare I believe in reincarnation is the only intellectual defensive interpretation of the data," end quote. For all the expressed interest in addressing the evidential question, I don't see what has done anything to address it. He doesn't state what it will mean for one statement to be evidence for another, much less do we find a criteria of evidence. I see no argument anywhere in the book that shows that data might not consider are evidence for reincarnation, much less good evidence or evidence that makes reincarnation likely. Some survivors who argue that reincarnation is the best explanation infer from the data that is therefore good evidence for reincarnation. In other words, they convert explanatory value into evidential value. This, of course, is an implausible inference, unless one appropriates to bridge the gap between explanation and evidence. So, is making us or suggesting this kind of argument? His discussion is so lacking clarity is hard to say. We can say that if he isn't making the bogus argument, implicitly reinforcing good evidence for explanatory power, he is making no argument at all for truth of reincarnation. On the other hand, he is making the bogus inference. His argument for reincarnation is probably stated and monumental bad. The problem with the attempt to get the explanatory power of reincarnation for how evident occurs is justifying the conversion of one kind of value, explanatory power, into another evidential value. There is no simple inference to good evidence or good truth or any other such epistemic assessment of belief. For the mere fact that some theory better explains the fact explanatory rival. And he doesn't help us bridge the gap. Although he lists a handful of explanatory criteria, he doesn't inform the reader how he thinks the explanatory succeed in this theory justify any kind of answer to the evidential question, much like how strong the evidence for reincarnation is supposed to be based on alleged explanatory power, though he seems to think that they makes reincarnation likely. Just to be clear, I'm not claiming that the best explanation of some data does not get evidential support from the data, not that this cannot be argued, or elsewhere I show the detail how exactly how this can and often is done using Bayesian probability. Through other frameworks are available. The salient point is meta does not do it, but he should, and he doesn't even seem to be aware of this problem. So he cannot justify claiming that the data provide good evidence for reincarnation, or that he shows that reincarnation is likely, and if he is not purporting to do this in the book, he should not claim it or otherwise suggest that it is. His own claims about the alternative non-reincarnation theory exacerbate the problem. He is highly critical of rival theories invoking to account for evidence. He thinks they're bad explanation, but if these alternatives are improbable, then it looks like the most we can conclude for reincarnation being the bad explanation is that it's just more probable than other highly improbable theories. But this is consistent with reincarnation being improbable. Every space of improbable theories will be occupied by theories more or less improbable in relation to each other, none that therefore merit our acceptance. Much of the obscurantism we have avoided and maliciously told what it means for some theft or observable talent to account as evidence for the truth of some statements. This is a very basic epistemological question and central to the broader survival debate. Why should, for example, verified claims to past life memory count as evidence for reincarnation? Why should behavioral resemblance between a current personality and a former living person count as evidence for reincarnation? Why should a birthmark be evidence for any kind of reincarnation? Matlock provides no answer to these crucial questions. He frequently used the phrase evidence for reincarnation only masks this problem. He allows him to conflate 1. Fact alleged to be evidence for survival, and 2. Facts shown to be evidence for survival, whether intentional or not. He allows him to sidestep the crucial challenge and showing that the data are evidence for reincarnation, good evidence, or the reincarnation is likely. I'm not saying that the data he examined are not evidence for reincarnation. I'm saying that he failed to show that they are. Why? Because he's done what is required in point of logic to do this, meaning describing the data in meticulous detail and saying their suggested or reincarnation doesn't meet the demands because either doesn't tell us enough or begs the question. Here is the recipient for his partial success in this regard. He needs to be clear about what it means for the data to be good evidence for reincarnation. The base level idea is straightforward enough. Whatever is evidence for another statement is a counter in favor of the truth of H, is an indicator of the truth of H or giving us a good reason to think H is true. Survivalists and non-survivalists often parse the concept of evidence in terms of evidential probability. Here, data are evident for H means that a statement confers some variable probability of H for some sample, raising H probability. Other papers evidently are at least partially interpreting. For example, data statements are evidence for H only if successfully explain the data statements. I don't expect Matlock to develop complete epistemology or theory of evidence, but he should at least be clear about what he's talking about. Second, he needs to state his criteria for evidence. He should state the condition under which he thinks data don't count as evidence for some other statements. And since evidence comes in degrees, his criteria for evidence could include principles that discriminate between different degrees of evidential support between statements. Such principles will at least tell us that weakly support hypothesis when data offers modest support, especially when data strongly support a hypothesis. As well, we here are extended to those support one hypothesis more than support another. Finally, you need to apply such principle canons of evidence for the data he discusses, his reincarnation theory and alternative theories. He has done none of this. Consequently, he cannot justify claiming the detail he meticulously described over 200 pages of evidence for reincarnation, more or less a good evidence. As a concluding remarks, I give a first essential criticism of the book. He failed to adequately address the crucial evidential question if there good evidence for reincarnation, but he claimed his book would do this. Second, he doesn't adequately address the explanatory question he first weighed, is reincarnation the best explanation for data, but he claims the book will do this. Third, as a result of the first two deficiencies, the connection between explanatory power and evidence is aback. In this way, his book exhibits a more widespread deficiency in the literature of survival. Finally, the analysis of argument in the book is badly impoverished, amateurish, even in places. He failed to offer already stated argument of his own position on those of his criticism. He doesn't seem to understand remedial philosophical concepts, misrepresent the claims, and those who hold positions that differ from his own. Like many other survivalists, he gives us a narrative, just so story, just to clear stand argument with coherent structure and command of the essential concept he deployed. Like evidence and explanation, he has reproduced a similar pattern in survivor literature. Present data, describe non-survivor explanation, ignores the argument for these counterexamples, and instead quote experts who seem to reject them or simply assert they have failed, and claim to survival this reincarnation wins. This is how the case for reincarnation is made. This is not how arguments of any kind are made. It's not how the advanced debate on survival. The topic is worth of a more serious kind of critical engagement. Which is sad. If evidence pours in terms of probability, one criteria of evidence naturally includes principle of distinction between 1. Evidence raising the probability of hypothesis. 2. Evidence making some hypothesis more probable than not and highly probable. And 3. Evidence in favor of one hypothesis, hypothesis H over another H. Bayesian analysis is often invoked to give a formal account of 1 and 2, whereas likelihoodness give account from accounts of 3 for discussion of probabilities. And this is why even the best people make the best defense shows the impossibility of reincarnation. And even then, if there is an afterlife, there are better theories out there.